When you hear the name Astor, perhaps you first envision the tragic tale of John Jacob Astor IV going down with the Titanic in 1912. The richest man aboard the doomed ship, he secured a lifeboat seat for his pregnant teenage wife before accepting his fate like a gentleman. Director James Cameron immortalized him in the classic 1997 film, the wealthy passenger reassuring others that the ship was unsinkable even as ice water flooded the grand staircase. Or Gen X and above viewers likely remember Brooke Astor, the grand dame of New York philanthropy who gave away $200 million before her own son was convicted of stealing from her. For decades, she was the face of American high society, elegant, generous, and seemingly untouchable until her final years revealed family dysfunction worthy of a soap opera. However, other New Yorkers know the name for different reasons entirely. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the New York Public Library, Astor Place, the family literally built the city's cultural foundations. And yet you and I can't name a famous American Astor alive in the 21st century. On the other hand, Brits have possibly heard of the Astors who became viscounts and barons, whose children marry into Belgian royalty, and whose stepchildren become prime ministers. And thus, a peculiar question comes up. How did one family's fortune create such wildly different outcomes? How did the same Astor bloodline produce British aristocrats attending royal weddings and American heirs no one has ever heard of? What happened between John Jacob Astor's fur trading empire and his descendants' divergent destinies? On today's episode of Old Money Empires, we explain how a single decision in 1890 split the Astor fortune in two. We'll reveal why British Astors keep climbing higher while American Astors struggle to pay heating bills. More importantly, we'll show you what this tale of two dynasties teaches us about how old money really works, or doesn't, in the modern world. Walk through Manhattan today and you'll trip over the Astor name at every turn. The iconic Waldorf Astoria Hotel still carries their legacy, even if they sold it decades ago. Bryant Park sits next to the New York Public Library, and Astor Place downtown reminds everyone who really built this city. Undoubtedly, for over 2 centuries, having Astor blood meant automatic entry to America's highest social circles. But here's what even people obsessed with the Gilded Age rarely mention. The Astor family split down the middle, and one side got everything, while the other got almost nothing. Indeed, today's Astors live completely different lives, depending on which side of the Atlantic they call home. The British branch married into royalty and kept climbing higher, while the American branch watched their inheritance dwindle with each passing generation. In fact, the contrast is so extreme, it's hard to believe they share the same bloodline. On one side, you have Astors who are literally connected to the British crown through marriage. They attend royal weddings, own massive estates, and sit in the House of Lords. Their children go to Eton and Oxford, just like their parents and grandparents did. Meanwhile, back in America, where it all started, the story took a darker turn. The same fortune that created British viscounts and barons left some American descendants struggling to heat their family mansions, and what started as America's first great fortune became a case study in how differently old money survives in different systems. See, the split began in 1890, when William Waldorf Astor decided America wasn't aristocratic enough for his tastes. He packed up his millions and sailed for England, where money could still buy titles and titles lasted forever. His American relatives stayed put, believing in democratic ideals and individual achievement. Neither side could have predicted how differently their choices would play out over the next century. The British Astors learned to protect and grow their wealth through the aristocratic system. The American Astors kept splitting their inheritance until mathematics caught up with them. What makes this even more fascinating is that the family didn't start in either country. They began as German immigrants with nothing but ambition and an eye for opportunity. John Jacob Astor arrived from Germany in 1783, speaking broken English and carrying musical instruments to sell. Within 5 years, he'd figured out the fur trade by traveling into the wilderness himself, learning from Native American trappers. By 1794, he was shipping furs to London and beyond, creating America's first international trading empire. Donning the title of America's first multimillionaire, he reinvested every profit into Manhattan real estate when farms still covered most of the island. People called him crazy for buying so far north of Wall Street, land that would become Times Square, the Upper West Side, and Midtown. But when he died in 1848, John Jacob Astor was worth $20 million, making him the richest man in America by far. His son William doubled that fortune through more strategic real estate purchases. Within a few generations, they'd created a fortune that would test the limits of both British aristocracy and American democracy. The results of that test reveal uncomfortable truths about how wealth really works on both sides of the Atlantic. By the 1880s, the British Empire controlled a quarter of the world's land, but couldn't balance its own books. The agricultural depression had destroyed rental income from tenant farmers. American wheat flooded European markets at prices British estates couldn't match. Death duties, introduced in 1894, would take 8% of an estate's value every time it passed to an heir. Magnificent country houses that had stood for centuries suddenly became white elephants. The Duke of Manchester was so broke he had to auction his furniture. The Duke of Marlborough couldn't afford to fix Blenheim Palace's leaking roof. Titles that once guaranteed wealth came with crushing maintenance bills and no income to pay them. Meanwhile, American industrialists had more money than they'd ever dreamed possible. The railroads, steel mills, and stock markets created fortunes that dwarfed European aristocracy. But these American millionaires discovered that money alone couldn't buy them respect in their own country's rigid social hierarchy. You could own half of Pittsburgh but still be snubbed by families who traced their lineage to the Mayflower. Thus, the solution emerged naturally. British titles needed American cash, and American cash needed British titles. Between 1870 and 1914, over 60 American heiresses married into European nobility. They brought over $200 million, about $6 billion today, into the European aristocracy. These weren't passionate romances or unions based on real love. They were business mergers between two types of power. For example, Consuelo Vanderbilt's mother locked her in her room until she agreed to marry the Duke of Marlborough. The Duke needed her $2.5 million dowry to save Blenheim Palace. Consuelo needed the title to elevate the Vanderbilt name above new money status. One woman named Jenny Jerome brought $200,000 to Lord Randolph Churchill and gave birth to a son named Winston. If you'd like to hear even more historical secrets about the Spencer-Churchill family, which includes both that young Winston and a future princess named Diana Spencer, the best place to get the aristocratic gossip is our free Substack newsletter, where we feature documentaries too scandalous for YouTube and much more. So visit the first link in the video description below to find out. And yet each dollar princess deal followed the same brutal logic: cash for class, dollars for duchesses. Now, our first protagonist, William Waldorf Astor, watched this transatlantic trade with growing interest. He'd inherited $40 million and owned much of Manhattan, but Caroline Astor still treated him like a poor relation. She controlled New York high society with her famous 400 list, and she made it clear that William's branch didn't quite measure up. In 1890, William made a decision that would split the Astor family forever. He closed his American accounts, liquidated what he could, and sailed for England with his fortune intact. Unlike the American heiresses who married for titles, William could afford to buy his own. His millions found a warm welcome in London, where American money didn't carry the stigma it did in New York. He purchased Hever Castle, where Anne Boleyn had lived, and began his campaign for a peerage. Within months, he was entertaining British aristocrats who needed loans, investments, and financial partnerships. By 1899, he'd become a British subject. By 1916, he'd been created Baron Astor, then Viscount Astor. His American relatives thought he'd lost his mind, trading democratic equality for feudal hierarchy. William knew better. He traded a system that could erode fortunes for one designed to preserve them forever, and soon the truth would show which side of the family had made the safest bet. The British Astors have played their cards perfectly, and it is shown in every generation since. William Astor, the current 4th Viscount Astor, sits in the House of Lords as a conservative hereditary peer. Born in 1951, he inherited a title and a network that reaches into every corner of British power. He married Annabel Lucy Veronica Jones in 1976, and here's where it gets interesting. Annabel brought her daughter Samantha into the Astor family from a previous marriage. That daughter grew up to marry none other than David Cameron, who became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. An Astor is literally the stepfather-in-law of a recent British Prime Minister. You can't buy that kind of connection, but apparently you can marry into it. The 4th Viscount had 3 children of his own: Flora Catherine, William Waldorf IV, and James Jacob. Each one maintains the family tradition of keeping a low profile while staying deeply connected to power. Flora focuses on family life away from the cameras. Young William has the burden and blessing of knowing he'll be the 5th Viscount someday. Jake, as he prefers to be called, found his own path while respecting family traditions. But the political connections run even deeper. John Jacob Astor VIII, the 3rd Baron Astor of Hever, took a different route to power. Born in 1946 and educated at Eton, he survived the 1999 House of Lords reform that kicked out most hereditary peers. From 2010 to 2015, he served as Parliamentary Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Defense. This meant real responsibility during a time of active military operations, not ceremonial duties. His son Charles made headlines with a fairy tale wedding in 2017. He married Princess Eliane of Belgium at Hever Castle, the same place where Anne Boleyn once lived. The bride's father is a Belgian prince, adding another layer of European nobility to the Astor mix. They've already had 2 daughters, Amadea and Allegra, representing the newest generation of titled Astors. The connections multiply through extended family branches as well. Harry Marcus George Lopes carries Astor blood through his family tree, inheriting the legacy of both the Astor and Lopes dynasties. His ancestors include Manasseh Massey Lopes, the 2nd Baron Robre, and Sephardic Jewish nobility like Duarte Lopes. But Harry's recent relevance comes from who he married. Laura Rose Parker Bowles is Queen Camilla's daughter from her first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles. This makes Harry Lopes, with his Astor heritage, the stepson-in-law to King Charles III himself. The Astor bloodline now literally connects to the British throne through marriage. Then there's Rose Astor, daughter of David Astor of Jupiter Asset Management. She married Hugh Van Cutsem, whose family holds a unique position in royal circles. Hugh's father was King Charles's best friend from their Cambridge days. Their daughter Grace served as a bridesmaid at William and Kate's wedding, the famous grumpy bridesmaid whose frown became an internet sensation. Even the younger generation knows how to make strategic moves. Charles John Astor, known as Shaky, briefly dated Pippa Middleton before she married James Matthews. Born in 1982, Shaky runs a children's entertainment company for wealthy clients. He holds a Guinness World Record for pantomime horse racing, proving you can be both aristocratic and amusing. Therefore, the modern Astors have indeed become integral to the British aristocracy, more than mere residents across the pond. Meanwhile, back in America, the Astor fortune was taking a very different path through the hands of Vincent Astor and his unusual wife. While their British cousins were marrying princesses, the American Astors were watching their fortune disappear piece by piece. The death of John Jacob Astor IV on the Titanic in 1912 marked more than a personal tragedy. It symbolized the beginning of the end for American Astor dominance. His son Vincent inherited the bulk of the estate and tried to do something different with it. Vincent Astor was probably the last American Astor with real financial power. He bought Newsweek magazine in 1937 when it was struggling and turned it into a major voice in journalism. The magazine operated out of a building his father had constructed, keeping everything in the family. But Vincent had what his family biographer called a social conscience, which in rich family speak means he gave away money rather than hoarding it. After serving in World War I, Vincent came home determined to change the family image. No more slumlords, no more squeezing tenants for every penny. He wanted the Astors to be philanthropists, not just property owners. Noble idea, but it came with a price. Vincent married Brooke Russell in 1953, his third marriage and her third as well. Brooke Astor became the most famous American Astor of the late 20th century, but she wasn't born an Astor. She was a military officer's daughter who married well, 3 times. When Vincent died in 1959, he left Brooke in charge of the Vincent Astor Foundation. She gave away nearly $200 million to New York institutions over the next several decades. The New York Public Library, the Metropolitan Museum, the Bronx Zoo, they all benefited from her largesse. She won the Presidential Medal of Freedom and became the Grand Dame of New York society. But here's the thing about giving away a fortune. Eventually, you run out of fortune to give. Brooke's own final years turned into a tabloid scandal. Her son, Anthony Marshall, was convicted of stealing from her while she suffered from Alzheimer's disease. The trial revealed she'd been living in squalor despite her millions, with her own family fighting over the scraps. Anthony himself had quite a resume: Marine officer, ambassador, CIA operative, Broadway producer, but he'll be remembered for elder abuse and grand larceny. His son Philip was the one who exposed him, turning the family dysfunction into front-page news. The American Astors had other branches too, but they followed similar patterns. Ivan Obolensky represents one of the stranger twists. His mother was an Astor. His father was a Russian prince who fled the revolution. Ivan co-founded a publishing house that produced serious literature, including Pulitzer Prize winners. He maintained some dignity and achievement for the family, but the real money was long gone. The story repeats across the American branches. Impressive titles, important connections, past glory, current struggles. They held on to the name, but lost the fortune that made the name famous in the first place. Alexandra Aldrich dropped a bomb on the Astor legacy when she published The Astor Orphan in 2013. As John Jacob Astor's descendant through 5 generations, she had every right to tell the family's secrets. What she revealed was more shocking than any tabloid scandal. She grew up in Rokeby, a 43-room mansion sitting on 420 acres in Barrytown, New York. From the outside, it looked like the perfect aristocratic childhood. The house was a landmark of American Gothic architecture. The property included woods, outbuildings, and enough land to get lost in. But inside those 40-foot-long hallways, reality was very different. Everyone in my neighborhood assumed we were aristocrats and wealthy because I was raised in a mansion, Alexandra explained. I really grew up extremely poor. The heating didn't work in most of the house. The roof leaked so badly that entire rooms were abandoned to rot. Dust covered antique furniture that nobody could afford to maintain or sell. The place smelled like decay because it was literally decaying around them. Her father, Ricky, embodied the Astor contradiction perfectly. Harvard educated with a famous last name, he worked as the mansion's unpaid handyman. He had the Astor sense of entitlement, but none of the Astor money to back it up. The family survived on food that others threw away. A nearby pie factory discarded frozen TV dinners, and that's what the Astors ate for dinner. Indeed, it's wild to think that direct descendants of America's first multimillionaire were eating other people's garbage. Alexandra's grandmother was reportedly an alcoholic who spent her days in a haze. Allegedly, her father refused to get a real job because Astors didn't work for other people. The family clung to their 400 acres and their famous name while everything else literally fell apart. So this wasn't just one unfortunate branch of the family tree. The Rokeby Astors represented what happened when old money ran out of new money to sustain it. They had the house, the land, the name, the portraits on the walls, but what they didn't have was cash for heat, repair, or fresh food. The estate became their prison, too valuable to abandon, too expensive to maintain. Alexandra escaped by writing about it, turning family tragedy into literary success, but there's no way around it. The British Astors were busy collecting new titles, while their American cousins collected dust and empty rooms. Now, the Astors weren't the only Gilded Age family to face the challenge of preserving wealth across many generations. And looking at their peers reveals a pattern. American fortunes rarely survived intact past the 3rd generation. The Vanderbilts provide the most cautionary tale. Cornelius Vanderbilt left $200 million when he died in 1877, more than the US Treasury held at the time. By 1973, when 120 Vanderbilt descendants gathered for a family reunion, not a single millionaire showed up. They'd blown through one of the largest fortunes in American history in less than a century. The money went to Fifth Avenue mansions, Newport quote-unquote cottages, yachts, parties, divorces, and bad investments. Gloria Vanderbilt, the most famous modern descendant, had to build her own fortune from scratch in fashion. Anderson Cooper, her son, works as a CNN anchor, a Vanderbilt actually earning a salary. The Goulds followed a similar trajectory. Jay Gould died worth $77 million in 1892, but his children managed to lose most of it within one generation. His son George tried to corner the wheat market and lost millions, like his father tried to corner the gold market. His daughter Anna threw money at a French nobleman who turned out to be a fraud. By the time the grandchildren came along, they were already selling off estates to pay debts. Compare this to the British Astors, who kept accumulating titles and connections with each generation. Or look at the Rockefellers, who created trusts and foundations that still control billions today. The Rothschilds split their fortune across European branches, but maintained coordination and intermarried to keep wealth concentrated. And therefore, many of these families understood something the American Astors, the Goulds, and the Vanderbilts missed. Preserving wealth requires structures, not just money. Therefore, the difference between success and failure wasn't about working harder or being smarter. It was about understanding which system you were operating in and adapting accordingly. The British Astors joined an aristocracy designed to perpetuate itself. The American Astors stayed in a democracy designed to create new fortunes, not necessarily preserve old ones. One branch got it right, and the other became a cautionary tale. With that said, now we'd love to see you in the comments. Before this video, were you aware of the other branch of the Astor family that still exists and was not as fortunate? And which other old money family would you like us to cover next on the channel? I look forward to hearing your thoughts below. And as always, thank you for your time with us here at Old Money Empires. And we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.